December 2010, Gilgo Beach. The winter wind whistles over deserted dunes as a Suffolk County police officer and his K9 move cautiously along Ocean Parkway. They've been searching for a missing woman, 24-year-old Shannon Gilbert, who vanished months earlier. Amidst the thorny brush and a light dusting of snow, the dog suddenly stiffens, catching an odor of death. The officer pushes aside tall reeds and discovers a decaying burlap sack. Inside are skeletal human remains. Within hours, 3 more bodies are found nearby. All young women, all wrapped in burlap like the first. A routine search for one missing person has uncovered a burial ground by the sea, and with it, the ominous realization that a serial killer may be stalking Long Island's South Shore. Welcome to Crime Code Red, the channel where we uncover the dark and hidden truths behind some of the most chilling crimes in history. Shannon Gilbert's disappearance, 2010. Spring 2010, months before that grisly discovery. Shannon Gilbert, an aspiring actress working as an escort, frantically dialed 911 in the pre-dawn darkness of May 1, 2010. She had been at a client's home in the secluded community of Oak Beach. On the 23-minute call, Shannon pleaded for help, telling dispatchers, "They are trying to kill me," though it was never clear who they were. Panicked and disoriented, Shannon fled into the night, knocking on neighbors' doors and screaming for someone to save her. An elderly resident, Gus Coletti, later reported that a terrified young woman banged on his front door around that time. By the time he called police, she had bolted away into the darkness. Outside, Coletti encountered Shannon's driver searching for her, who claimed she had run off from a house party in distress. Then, silence. Shannon Gilbert disappeared into the marshy wetland bordering Gilgo Beach, her whereabouts unknown. When Shannon's family reported her missing, the Suffolk County Police launched a limited search in the gated Oak Beach area where she was last seen. Initially, officers found few clues beyond Shannon's scattered belongings: a purse, a cell phone, her shoes, discovered in the weeds months later. As the seasons passed with no sign of Shannon, frustration grew. It wasn't until December 2010, 7 months after she vanished, that an officer decided to sweep along Ocean Parkway outside Oak Beach, hoping for a breakthrough. That's when police officer John Malia and his cadaver dog, a German shepherd named Blue, made the fateful find. A set of human remains, wrapped in disintegrating burlap, lying just yards from the parkway's edge. The long-awaited clue in Shannon's case turned out to be someone else entirely. The Gilgo Four are found. Over 2 days in mid-December 2010, investigators combing the sandy brush along Gilgo Beach uncovered 4 bodies in total, all within about 500 feet of one another. The skeletal remains would soon be identified as Maureen Brainerd Barnes, Melissa Barthelemy, Megan Waterman, and Amber Costello, women in their 20s who, like Shannon, had been sex workers advertising on Craigslist. Each had been missing for years. Maureen since 2007, Melissa since 2009, Megan and Amber since 2010. Now they were tragically linked in death on the same lonely strip of shoreline. Police and the press dubbed them the Gilgo Four. Investigators noted the eerie similarities. All were petite women who had worked as escorts, all vanished after going to meet clients, and all 4 bodies had been hidden in burlap sack material and dumped in close proximity. Suffolk County's police commissioner at the time, Richard Dormer, acknowledged the disturbing pattern. In a hushed press conference amid the dunes, Dormer admitted, "We could have a serial killer on our hands." It was a watershed moment. The first official confirmation that the authorities were likely dealing with a single predator responsible for multiple murders. The Gilgo Beach murders had burst into public consciousness, and Long Island's quiet winter beaches suddenly became the focus of one of the country's most sprawling homicide investigations. As forensic teams scoured the thickets for evidence, they faced immediate challenges. These victims had been dead for months or years, exposed to brutal coastal elements. Their remains were mostly skeletal, complicating efforts to determine precise causes of death or find traces of the killer's DNA. The killer's use of burlap sacks to conceal the bodies hinted at a methodical approach, perhaps aiming to transport the remains and hinder forensic evidence. Early profiling by criminal experts suggested the unknown perpetrator was likely a white male in his mid-20s to 40s, familiar with the south shore of Long Island, someone who knew the desolate beach access points and had ready access to burlap sacks, possibly through work or hobbies. The person was careful, patient, and clearly comfortable traversing the remote terrain at odd hours. This led profilers to suspect he might even be a local resident, or someone with a reason to be in the area without arousing suspicion. Early theories and investigation hurdles. By spring 2011, the investigation into the Gilgo Beach killings was in full swing and growing in scope. In March and April 2011, as the thaw set in, police expanded their search beyond the initial Gilgo 4 crime scene. What they found deepened the mystery. 6 more sets of human remains scattered along Ocean Parkway and nearby stretches of Suffolk's and Nassau County's shores. These included the partial remains of 2 women who had been killed years earlier. Portions of their bodies had been discovered in 2000 and 2003 in Manorville, further east on Long Island. There was also the skull of an unidentified young woman nicknamed Peaches, for a tattoo on her body, and the bones of her toddler daughter. Another set of remains belonged to an unidentified male dressed in women's clothing. The tally of victims found since Shannon's disappearance now stood at 10. A macabre jigsaw puzzle of lives cut short. Detectives faced a haunting question. Was this the work of one serial killer, or multiple? The Long Island serial killer, LISK, became the catch-all name, but investigators debated whether they were chasing one predator or several. The Gilgo 4 fit a clear profile, yet differences in other victims' ages, genders, and dismemberment patterns suggested a second killer or copycat. From the start, the case was riddled with challenges. Decomposed remains yielded little DNA, no eyewitnesses emerged, and only one chilling clue stood out: taunting phone calls to Melissa Barthelomy's sister in 2009. Those calls were untraceable, made from disposable burner phones in crowded Midtown Manhattan locations. The killer was technologically and criminally savvy, leaving scant evidence behind. Early theories swirled. Was the killer a client targeting sex workers, a law enforcement insider, or a savvy local exploiting jurisdictional gaps? The crimes were methodical, bodies carefully dumped, burlap used to avoid contact, and victims chosen from society's margins. This suggested an offender who appeared ordinary, possibly with a job and family, yet harbored violent fantasies. As one investigator put it, the killer was likely hiding in plain sight, blending into suburban life while prowling for prey. The FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit stepped in, building a profile as investigators sifted through leads. Yet from the beginning, the investigation was hampered by missteps and missed opportunities. One major hurdle was interagency tension. In the crucial early months, Suffolk County's then police chief James Burke refused outside help, even from the FBI. Burke, who had a domineering hold over the department, insisted his detectives could solve the case on their own. This decision baffled many, given the FBI's experience with serial killer investigations. It would later emerge that Burke's reluctance was more about protecting his own turf and secrets than about jurisdictional pride. Years later, Burke himself would be convicted on unrelated charges after assaulting a man who stole a duffel bag from his car. A bag filled with sex toys and pornography, embarrassments Burke went to illegal lengths to cover up. His blockade of federal assistance meant critical forensic resources and databases were not tapped into early on. For example, cell phone records from those disposable phones used by the killer were not fully analyzed by federal experts for years because the FBI wasn't officially on the case until late 2015. Other lapses slowed the hunt. Some victims' families and advocates accused Suffolk police of being dismissive early in the case, perhaps biased because the victims were sex workers. Indeed, Shannon Gilbert's disappearance itself was initially treated as a likely accident rather than a crime. Even after the spate of bodies was found, officials like Commissioner Dormer publicly maintained that Shannon's death might be unrelated, suggesting she had drowned in the marsh by accident while fleeing in a panic. This stance, which many found premature, may have led investigators to take their eye off potential connections. Shannon's family, led by her mother Mari Gilbert, pressed relentlessly for answers. Mari distrusted the police's conclusions and argued that Shannon must have been killed like the others, accusing law enforcement of not doing enough to find her killer. Her advocacy kept Shannon's case in the spotlight, But tragically, Mari herself would later fall victim to violence, murdered in 2016 by another of her daughters during a mental health crisis. By the end of 2011, a full year after the Gilgo 4 were discovered, Shannan Gilbert's own remains were finally found. In December 2011, police unearthed Shannan's skeleton in a swampy area less than a mile from where she'd gone missing. The discovery location, deep in a marsh, seemed to corroborate the theory that she had gotten lost and drowned. The medical examiner ruled her cause of death inconclusive, and Suffolk police continued to assert Shannan was not a victim of the serial killer. However, an independent autopsy sought by her family suggested possible signs of strangulation. The truth about Shannan's fate remained uncertain. What was clear, though, was that her disappearance had been the catalyst for exposing a serial nightmare. In the process of searching for Gilbert, they turned up 10 bodies they believe are the victims of a single serial killer, as one report summed up. The Long Island community, especially residents near Gilgo Beach, were left shaken and fearful knowing that a predator, or predators, had been living among them, dumping bodies where families sunbathed in summer and anglers cast lines in autumn. Did police negligence delay justice? As the early investigation stretched on with no arrests, tough questions began to emerge. Did missteps by law enforcement allow a killer to slip through the cracks? Some families and observers believed so. The decision to sideline the FBI for years was a glaring error, one that former prosecutor Gilbert Spera later said set the investigation back by at least 5 years. Leads that could have been pursued with federal assistance, like tracing those cell phone pings or analyzing cross-state patterns, languished. Key evidence was overlooked. For instance, a witness had reported seeing a large man in a dark SUV, possibly a Chevy Avalanche, in the area when one victim, Amber Costello, disappeared in 2010. But that tip lay dormant in case files for over a decade. Only in 2022 did a refreshed task force realize its significance, a delay that possibly allowed the killer to remain active or at least at large far longer than he should have. Meanwhile, the leadership of Suffolk County's police was in turmoil. In late 2015, Chief James Burke was arrested and later convicted on federal charges for his earlier misconduct and cover-up. The Suffolk County District Attorney at the time, Thomas Spoda, was also convicted for helping Burke hide his misdeeds. This corruption scandal further eroded public confidence. Had the very officials responsible for catching a serial killer been too busy covering their own tracks? John Ray, an attorney for several victims' families, including Shannan Gilbert's, did not mince words. This case was bungled and polluted from the beginning, he said, condemning how evidence and leads were handled in those crucial first years. The perception of incompetence and possible cover-up cast a long shadow over the investigation. Still, dedicated detectives continued to chip away at the case through the 2010s, quietly sorting through phone records, bank transactions of the victims, and hundreds of tips from the public. Profilers refined their views of the killer. He was likely highly organized, sexually motivated, and opportunistic. The tormenting phone calls to Melissa Barthelomy's family suggested a sadistic streak, a killer who enjoyed power and control. This was someone who could kill and then coolly call a victim's sister to say, "Your sister is dead," as the LISK did in 2009. Such behavior indicated a fearless and psychopathic mind. Yet years passed, and the Long Island serial killer remained unidentified. By the end of episode 1, the stage is set. A community haunted, a killer on the loose, and an investigation in dire need of a breakthrough. Little did anyone know, it would take over a decade and a new generation of investigators to finally crack the case open. The hunt for the killer had only just begun, and the darkest secrets were yet to be revealed. This is just the beginning. In the next episode, we'll dive deep into the suspects, the theories, and the shocking conspiracies that surround the Long Island serial killer. If you don't want to miss it, make sure to subscribe to Crime Code Red and turn on notifications so you're the first to know when the next episode drops. And if you found this case as fascinating as we did, leave a comment below with your thoughts. Who do you think the real Long Island serial killer is? See you in the next one.